Welcome back, everybody. And today's video essay is on a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And I've been asked by a number of friends to make a video on this for some time. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the Matrix trilogy and a little tiny bit at the end about the recent film, the fourth film. But I'm going to focus my attention on the original three films, as well as the Animatrix, which was a collection of short animated films set in the Matrix world that connect some of the plot points between the end of the first film and the beginning of the second film. And as a starting point for trying to talk about these films, I think it's been well rehearsed that they're philosophically robust. I have a box set DVD collection of the Matrix films, and one of them includes a documentary called The Matrix and Philosophy, and it has all kinds of famous philosophers and theologians talking about the films. There's been any number of books published on this, so I don't particularly claim to have anything. Well, I think I have something original to say about it, but I just want to acknowledge that this is something that people have talked about for some time. But the starting point for me will be just an assumption that the first film in particular is just a masterpiece, right? And I want to start my analysis with the claim that this is one of the greatest sci-fi films of all time. And the purpose of this video is to argue against a very widespread perception that the first film is amazing and the second and third films are not. I am of the view that the second and third films and the Animatrix are also incredible. They are not as good of films in terms of raw filmmaking is concerned. The first film achieves a level of integration and concision that the second and third films lack. But I still believe that the second and third films are incredible. And for me, I need all of these films to be able to fully appreciate the story that the Wachowskis were trying to tell. And so I strongly disagree with the view that the second film and the third film are trash. One preliminary reason that I really enjoy the sequels is that they blow the world up of the first film in a really amazing way. The first film is basically perfect. It is just clean, lean, mean storytelling. And it's a wonderful story. And they rightfully had on their hands at that time just a complete blockbuster. And what I love about the second film in particular, which controversially is my favorite of the three films, is that they just blow it up. They just start cramming in reams of philosophical dialogue. The action sequences are just totally unwieldy. And for me, I just loved how out of control it was. I loved how huge and ridiculous and weird and wild though that second film was. And the third film, I love how they just at breakneck speed at 11 on the volume dial, they just barrel neck to a conclusion. And I just found myself profoundly satisfied with the conclusion. So even though from a raw film aesthetics point of view, the second and third films are inferior, I feel like they're inferior with a reason in mind, with a purpose in mind, which is to just really explore the world they were only kind of gesturing towards in the first film. And so while the original film of The Matrix kind of had everything sewn together in a seamless way, the second and third films really split and opened and divided and blew up all the different things that made the first film good: the action sequences, the philosophy, the aesthetics. And on a more philosophical note, my main reason for thinking that the whole trilogy is a work of art is that the main themes of the films cannot be fully grasped and appreciated without all of them, that there is actually a very profound philosophical meditation happening across all three films, and that explore what I think of as a singular theme. And that theme is the question of how self-knowledge relates to the gradual acquisition of freedom and the cultivation of agency. I think that one of the theses of these films is that freedom is not an on-off switch. It's not something we either have or we don't, but it is something that is cultivated through the discipline of self-knowledge. And I believe that this is certainly Neo's main arc, but it is also, to a lesser extent, the arc of many other of the main characters in the film, in particular, the character of Morpheus, whose faith and understanding of the nature of choice is powerfully challenged across the films, especially in the transition from his confidence and devotion in the first film, his faith, as it were, to his world being basically blown up and turned upside down by the end of the second film, and his attempt to relocate his faith, not in a myth or a story, but in the people around him that he's working with to try and make a better life for all the human beings that are left in that world. But more back to Neo, the character of Neo, I really think that the genius of these films can, be seen when we explore the relationship between Neo and the character of the Oracle. So the Oracle is a really interesting character, and her conversations with Neo across the three different films, I think, give a very interesting kind of insight into the development of Neo's understanding of his own power. So in the first film, when Neo is still kind of green and not really sure of what's going on and whether or not he is the one, he meets the Oracle, and she is sort of several steps ahead of him, predicting his behavior and embroiling him in some paradoxical thinking about the nature of prescience. So she predicts that he will break the vase. He breaks the vase. He asks her how she knew, and then she kind of shrugs and grins and says, "What's really going to bake your noodle later on is, would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything?" This kind of humbles Neo a little bit, and he starts to listen, and she gives him some predictions. By the end of that film, when he starts to believe in himself and recognize that he is the one, he is questioning the Oracle, and Morpheus assures him, "She told you what you needed to hear so that you would make the choice to step into this role for your own reasons and not because of anyone else's." And this is the first, I think, deep hint that this idea of knowing yourself, making your own choices, and facing the consequences of those choices is a profound part of how these movies are trying to tell a story. By the end of the second film, after his encounter with the Oracle, things get a little more complicated. She offers him a candy, and instead of receiving it, he starts to ask her questions. He says, "Well, you already know whether or not I'm going to take it." And her reply is, "Oh, well, I wouldn't be much of an oracle if I didn't." And then he says, "Well, if you already know, then how can I make a choice?" And she said, "You're not here to make a choice. You've already made the choice. You're here to understand why you made the choice." So here, the relationship between self-knowledge and choice becomes more complicated. There is a delay. There's a temporal delay between the choice being made and one's understanding. And this creates a kind of determinism for Neo, but one that at least can be philosophically explored. And then we see that same point mirrored in the conversation between the Merovingian and Morpheus, where the Merovingian sort of says that choice is an illusion created between those who have power and those who don't have it, whereas Morpheus is still at that time embracing a more libertarian understanding of freedom. And Neo and the Oracle's conversation sort of hovers in the middle between libertarianism and determinism with a kind of compatibilism. And it's not until the end of the third film, when he meets the Oracle for the last time, and she offers him a candy and he simply says, no, thank you. And all the decisions that Neo makes in the third film, people ask him whether the Oracle told him, and he simply says no. He's at that point making his own choices. He's not relying on any structures or narratives given to him by the world around him in order to self-determine. And I think that this sort of individual evolution of Neo as someone who progressively acquires self-knowledge, and then with that knowledge is able to cultivate agency and freedom to make authentic choices, is just a really profound thought. And it's a thought that is stitched into the deep fabric of the film's character arcs, but one that isn't ever really explicitly thematized. It's always just sort of there in the background. And it's not just about the individual. It's not just about Neo's choices, but it is situated in a larger context, the context of the fight between humanity and technology, the machines. And here is where the second film and the third film become indispensable, because we don't really get to have a conversation with the machine intelligence until the end of the second film. And for my money, that dialogue between Neo and the architect at the end of the second film is an incredibly rich dialogue, where we are informed that even the very physical existence of Zion is part of the machine's control program to keep the people in the Matrix under control, so that they have somewhere to go if they choose that they want to escape the Matrix. But even if they choose to escape the Matrix, they're still under the machine's control, which I thought was just an amazing narrative inversion of the kind of clean, clear, Christ narrative of the first film, where, the machines are subdued by the power of human freedom. And it turns out that by the end of the second film, that no, they actually have a control mechanism in place to account for that as well. And that point comes full circle at the end of the third film, where Neo makes his way to the machine city to try and negotiate with the machines to stop Agent Smith. And he simply says, that you can't stop him, but I can. And the machines say, we don't need you, we need nothing. And Neo's response is very simple. If that is true, I've made a mistake and you should kill me now. And I've always thought that this is just a remarkably nuanced story, and you need all three parts to really understand the story. One thing I do want to acknowledge about all three films is that the acting is pretty bad. The characters are not that rich. I love Morpheus, and Lawrence Fishburne does a great job with Morpheus, but on the whole, these are not well-acted films. But I think that's okay. I think perhaps more than any film I've ever seen, these characters are merely vessels for the delivery of a theory, of a philosophical meditation on the nature of freedom, the role of technology in shaping human consciousness, and vice versa, and how self-knowledge shapes our sense of possibility. And this is what makes the dialogue so interesting and so flat at the same time, because they're there to simply try and deliver as directly as possible the philosophical moves that constitute the tapestry of these themes that they're trying to explore. And for this reason, I've always found the films just to be powerfully compelling meditations that I have found to be so enriching for my life, and not just sci-fi entertainment, which is why it was, frankly, just quite sad to see the fourth film. The fourth film, to its credit, I think, did a pretty remarkable job of justifying itself conceptually, but the execution was just, I thought, very terrible. The first 30 minutes were almost unwatchable. The attempt to sort of bring in all old characters in new forms just felt really ham-fisted and unjustified, and relative to the precision and elegance of the end of the story by the conclusion of the third film, the fourth film wasn't a story that needed to be told. It just didn't, there was no reason to do it, except for maybe emotional gratification on the part of the filmmakers. And that's their prerogative, it's their story, and that's no one's business. But I think that the the three original films are just so absurdly tight and integrated and profound. I didn't really want to go back there. I wanted it to just be this pure thing that was done. I really didn't like the fourth film, and I probably won't watch it again. But the three original films are films that I will continue to return to over and over and over again. And again, I have never really understood where all the hatred for the second and third films came from. I thought they were just wonderful, sophisticated, exciting movies that really pushed the boundaries of philosophical reflection and cinema. And I just ate it up with a ladle, every minute of it. And so that's why I think they're amazing. And I don't expect to have convinced anybody, but that's my hot take on why I think the Matrix trilogy, all three, are just some of the greatest movies I've ever seen. So my favorite story, one of my favorite stories of all time. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. Okay, that's it for me. Take care, everybody.